Welcome to the McInnis New Employees Safety Orientation. My name is Scott Overby and I will be narrating the training. If you have your iPhone or an Android, please scan the QR code on the screen. This will take you to all our important information where you can see uploaded videos, connection directly to our Facebook page, along with other social media. Very important McInnis AI bot that you can ask any question and it has answers. And also the SDS manual. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Our theme at McInnis is that we build safe together. So today I'm going to go over all this training and we'll look at our organization chart, safety slogan, OSHA overview. We'll look at infectious disease, a review of the Employees Safety Handbook, review of the safety manual, the SDS manual, identifying hazards and hazardous communication, hazard mitigation, PPE discussion and provided. Also Silica awareness training. We will look at fall protection training, leading edge training, man lift operation training, drug and alcohol awareness, heat illness, trench and excavation, ladder safety, and hand tools. Once you go through some of these certifications, you'll receive a sticker for your hard hat. It will show others what you have completed. And also, you'll get a QR code with your name on it that will take you or any client directly to our training. All they have to do is scan the QR code with a smartphone. So, our theme at McInnis this year is zero incidents, zero accidents, zero reportables, zero recordables, and missing zero paperwork. So paperwork has to be done. Let's watch this video from Clay McInnis, our safety manager and workforce development.
Hi, I'm Clay McInnis. At McInnis Construction, we build safe together and strive to be America's best heavy civil contractor. This is our mission statement, and it is anchored in our purpose. It's why we do what we do. To steward a culture enriching the lives of our employees, suppliers, subcontractors, and customers through dedication to faith, family, and integrity. This is our vision statement. It's how we carry out our purpose together. Our grandfather started building bridges over 50 years ago, and since that time, the McInnis Way has emerged as a roadmap of success. Our values are faith, family, and integrity. We build trust by being honest, able, reliable, and helpful. We get traction by building safe and together. Do we adapt in the face of adversity and communicate through it? That's how we get it to action. And the result is if we live out the McInnis Way each and every day, we will all win at home, work, and in our communities.
Just as iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. We rely on each other at McInnis Construction, and we follow along with Proverbs 27:17, where we help equip one another to be a good team, getting things done safely. This year's theme was being positive. Every day, wake up and be positive. When you come to the job, be positive and do the right thing every time. You'll start your day with your supervisor providing a JHA, called a job hazard analysis, every day, sometimes more than one a day. He will also record a near miss and have a discussion with you employees about the near miss. And you, as well as him, will be able to make observations. There'll also be a weekly toolbox talk, safety inspections that are done each week. Again, we're in all the social media, Facebook, our web page, LinkedIn, Twitter, also Instagram. And this is just a picture to remind us that we run an average of 100 employees at McInnis. This is a picture of some of our crews. This is a reminder that we build safe together at McInnis. And there's three core values. We're faith-based, family-oriented, and integrity-driven. Here's another great picture of some of our crews. So now we're going to go over the organizational chart rather quickly. I did want you to know that there are 5 owners at McInnis. Timothy McInnis, who was the president, and then his father, Mr. Tim, as we call him. And then Steve Parrish is our CFO and has been with the company for a very long time. Travis Tyler is the Vice President of Operations. And then Clay McInnis is over Workforce Development and Safety. You can see under Steve Parrish, the accounting and the admin. He heads up information technology, equipment such as our iPads, iPhones, and computers, software, risk management. Working for him is Sherry Parrish, his wife, who takes care of accounts payable and accounts receivable. And then payroll is Angie Singleton, who does many other things in our company. Again, Vice President of Operations, Travis Tyler. I will show you a video from him.
This will be 21 years this year, starting off with a dirt contractor and then another bridge contractor. And then I've been with McInnis, this will be my 17th year this coming February. So we started in February of 2002. So that'd be 17 years. Just looking back on my career and where I started at and where I'm at today, my biggest advice would be that every opportunity that you get to always learn from it, and never just settle for what you're doing at that point. You know, try to learn what your boss's job is, what your the crane operator on the job, what he's doing and why he's doing it. Not just watching him do it, but why is he, swinging the way he's swinging, or booming down, booming up. Figure out what every person's doing, and every time you can get your hands on a set of plans, look at the plans so that you can understand why you're building the cap the way you're building it, or driving the piles in the positions that you're driving them in. Don't just settle for, well, my boss told me to put it right there, so I'm going to put it right there. Know why you're doing what you're doing, and that will help you learn, the reason, and advance you up the chain. And never settle for where you're sitting at today. Always want to be better tomorrow, and always learn. That would be my first piece of advice. Second piece of advice would be happy where you're at. Be joyful. Find joy in the position that you're in, but always be hungry for the next position. Always find joy where you are. I'm a firm believer that the Lord puts you where you are, and He's going to teach you and train you and guide you to your next spot. But find joy where He has you, and then that just give you a joyful life. You won't be so bitter and angry all the time. Just find joy in where you are. Yeah, I would think back. I always think back when I'm thinking about my time in the field is when I was operating cranes, and I can remember we were working for Clark Construction at the time. And there was another crew, and they turned over some cranes. They flipped them, and the owner was actually flagging the operator. And my advice, is always look at how the crane is set up, how far apart your mats are spaced. They were walking a crane, the flagman was flagging the operator forward, and they had set the mats too far apart. So there was about a 3-foot gap between your mats, and the toes went off. He had the load in the air. When he came off with his toes, the crane fell over. Luckily nobody got killed on that, but always be aware of what those cranes are sitting on and the foundation that it's sitting on, because in our line of work, falling is a big hazard, but that crane setup and operating is a huge danger on our jobs. So, I've got a bunch of Bible verses for different situations in my life that I try to keep in my mind. but the one I would like to share would be Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I always think of that when I'm in a hard situation and I don't really know how I'm going to get out of it, how I'm going to handle it. But I know that through prayer and the Lord, I know I can walk in His will because He's with me. And I know no matter what, it's going to turn out fine. It may not turn out the way I want it, but the Lord's with me and I can handle it because He strengthens me.
As we continue meeting your new family here at McInnis, we have our estimating and pre-construction and submittal engineer, Abe Bailey. Along with him in pre-construction administration is Miss Angie Singleton. In our project management, we have Junie Ellis, Ty Tyler, and we have an assistant project manager, Caleb Tyler. Field operations management and general superintendent, Sammy Pointer. Our surveying and layout folks is Ron Bartholomew, the supervisor, along with Brian and Javier. Our newest field surveyor is Blake. We have a lot of equipment at McInnis, and our equipment asset manager is Bradson at the Summerdale Yard. Also, we have a heavy equipment mechanic with Jeff McWaters. Trucking with Summerdale, also David Waller and John Brown, and they also are a part of our crane assembly disassembly program. As far as the equipment goes, we have owned equipment and rental equipment. We do crane inspections, we do maintenance, there's tag out procedures, there's also equipment reporting. We have a lot of pickup trucks that the foreman, superintendent, and other managers drive. And then our consumable procurement, that comes from our assistant project managers. Our boots on the ground in the field are our project supervision. We have people like Josh Tyler and Chris Moore, Kyle Helms, Jason Geis, Clint Watson. Some of our bridge foremen are Rogelio Martinez, Ivan Gissendanner, David Waller, Florencio, and Norberto. And you may see at the Montgomery operations, Mr. Tim over trucking and yard and office management, and the yard foreman is Patsy Patterson, who also delivers to the job sites. The positions that are available here at McInnis are unskilled laborers, carpenters, form setters, form setter trainees, concrete laborers, concrete finishers, front end loader, operator, crane operators, crane operator trainees, field engineers, foremen, superintendents, bridge superintendents, general superintendents, assistant project managers, and project managers. I started with the unskilled labor at the top because without them we can't do anything. Here's a couple of pictures of some of our folks. This is one of our men graduating, receiving his license for crane operator. Here's another one of our superintendents awarding a white hat to one of our employees. When you start at McInnis, you wear a green hat, then you move to the white hat. The green hat is for the first year of all new employees. That way everyone can keep an eye on you and help keep you safe. Here, Kyle is receiving his crane operator foreman hard hat. Those are the brown hard hats on the job site. And then here there's some extra training that we can get through ALDOT. This was a certificate for carpentry, but they do all kinds of different training. I want to talk briefly about OSHA. OSHA stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. You do need to learn about that. Here's a quick video.
OSHA is the division within the Department of Labor that's charged with overseeing the Occupational Safety and Health Act. OSHA has the broad authority to investigate complaints and impose citations and penalties on employers who violate the Act. OSHA is responsible for setting federal safety and health standards and promulgating those standards with employers. OSHA is also responsible for all employer inspections. Inspections are made without any advance notice to the employer and are done based on the following issues in priority order, starting with imminent danger, followed by catastrophes like fatalities or hospitalizations, worker complaints and referrals, targeted inspections in high injury rate industries, and follow-up inspections. The employer can decide not to allow an inspection without an inspection warrant, a court order establishing OSHA probable cause for inspection, but this is generally not a very good idea on a number of levels, as you might imagine. In general, it makes more sense to allow the inspection to go on in accordance with OSHA rules. The employer has the right to get the inspector's credentials, including their name badge and badge number, and to receive information on the reason for the inspection, either the employee complaint or the program inspection information. Assuming that an inspection is allowed, we need to be aware of some things that we have the right to and that we should do during the inspection. If the inspection is being conducted due to a worker complaint, we have the right to get a copy of the complaint without the employee's name, and we want to do so because we want to know what's being alleged. And secondly, we have the right to have a company representative accompany inspectors as they go through their site visit, and we, as well as an HR representative, want to accompany them. Employees' rights during inspections include the right to refuse to be interviewed, or if an employee agrees to an interview, they can request that the employer representative be present or that the interview be held in private. OSHA requires that all employers maintain information at each work site that describes any chemical hazards that may be present on site. Safety data sheets, known as SDSs, are documents that provide information on a hazardous chemical and its characteristics. Common OSHA violations are as follows: willful, serious, other than serious, de minimis, failure to abate, and repeated. Willful and or repeated violations can bring the employer up to a $126,749 fine for each violation.
So we'll come back to the violation dollar amount. That was a older dollar amount. It goes up 4% every year. We'll talk about OSHA's top 10 violations for 2020. Before I do that, let me clear this up about the penalties. You can see in January of this year, 23, the different types of violations that were mentioned and what the penalty fees are. What you need to know is that a willful or a repeated is $156,259 per violation. If you fail to wear your safety glasses on the job site that you've been issued from the company, that's a $15,625 fine per violation. Let's take a look at these top 10 in 2020. Fall protection, 5,424 violations. Hazardous communication, again, you can see a large number. Number 3, respiratory protection. Number 4, scaffolding. Number 5, ladders. And we'll do some additional ladder training in the next video. Our lockout tagouts, number 6, and number 7 is your forklifts, power industrial trucks. They're called PITs, P-I-T. And then fall protection training, which we will never get a penalty for that because we train everyone. Personal protective or PPE, life-saving equipment for eye, face, and hands, and machine guarding. OSHA puts out these quick cards, which are fantastic, and they have what they call the Focus 4. The Focus 4 start with preventing falls, because falls is the number one serious injury or death in construction. This could be anything from climbing a ladder, working off a scaffold, working surface for slip, trips, and falls. It could be working without a harness and a lanyard. Prevent struck by on every job site. There's large pieces of equipment always. Excavators, cranes, front end loaders, all kinds. You have to always pay attention. That's why we always wear an orange vest or an orange shirt so that we have high visibility clothing on. Also, we need to try to cut back on the caught in betweens. What that is like if you were in an excavation and the walls caved in on you. That's being caught in between. And remember this, an unprotected excavation 5 feet or deeper without protective system in place, some trenches under 5 feet may also need some type of system. So just remember, anytime we're digging in the earth and we're greater than 5 feet, we must provide protection for all workers. So make sure it is protected by either sloping, shoring, benching, or trench shield systems. Also, of the focus for electrocutions, prevent those. It's not uncommon for crane booms, material handling, excavators to come in contact with the power lines, and there's some emergency procedures you have to follow. But this has caused a lot of serious injuries and deaths in construction. Also, in this area of electrocution, you have to be careful about the portable electric hand tools that you're using. They either need to be grounded with the third pin on the cord or double insulated. Use a ground fault circuit interrupter for protection, and always be alert to any electrical hazards when working from ladders, scaffolds, or other platforms. Let's take a look at the PPE real quick. So we will issue you a hard hat, safety vest. Safety vest will have the sleeves on it, be class 3. I'll show you that in a minute. Safety glasses, earplugs for any decibels over 85. And remember, if you're speaking loudly to someone and you can't hear them without raising your voice, that's probably 85 decibels. Gloves to protect your hands, and then of course fall protection. Here are some examples of wearing the proper PPE on the job. Notice the bright orange vests. They really stand out on the project. Employees Safety Handbook is critical. We'll go through that in a minute. But on the green hard hat, you'll wear that your first year. Here's a silly picture of Mario getting his new white hard hat and then smashing his old green hard hat. Let's go through the handbook. Let's go through the new Employees Safety Handbook. We will not cover everything, but we will definitely look at the majority of this. This is a handbook that you will have a copy of, and you will also need to resign the last page when you do your intake paperwork with HR. Remember, leadership, safety, and faith all go hand in hand. Leadership is not about titles and positions or flowcharts. It's about one life influencing another. John Maxwell. You can just look at this table of contents and see how involved the handbook is. We'll go through some of these a little bit at a time. First off, we want to talk about responsibilities. All employees need to report to work drug and alcohol free, physically, mentally prepared for work safely. And I want to add that in the summer months, you need to be sure and be hydrated when you come to work. That means if you take medication, you need to drink extra water or electrolytes. If you were out drinking the night before, that could adversely affect your performance and your ability to resist dehydration. You need to know and follow all the safety rules. Report any accidents to your supervisors. Work safely to ensure not only your safety, but that of your coworkers. Ask for help when you're unsure how to perform a task safely. And report any unsafe acts or conditions that you observe. Let me ask you this. Who has the right to stop the job for a safety issue? That's right, you do. Everyone does. Everyone on the job site has permission from the owners to stop the job if an unsafe condition exists so that you can talk about it, mitigate it, and figure out what to do to get around that. Also, report to your supervisor if you're having any problems that you're not able to correct. Use and maintain your own PPE and safety equipment. Do housekeeping daily to maintain a safe work environment. Remember, a clean work site is a safe work site. Remember to lift with your legs and not your back. Get help with heavy objects like oxygen bottles and acetylene bottles and heavy pieces of equipment and material. Wear your seatbelt when you're operating vehicles or equipment. Ask for instruction in safe procedures and performance of assigned duties, and use the proper tools, that, especially the new and unfamiliar ones that you have. Now, the responsibilities of the superintendent and job foreman, well, they plan all your work activities with safety in mind. They will provide a JHA first thing in the morning, a job hazard analysis, which talks about the activities you're going to do and points out what the potential hazards are in that process. They're responsible for being keenly aware of safety requirements and safe working practices. They also plan ahead for safety, and they stop work if unusual conditions rise. So make sure you're using the PPE that's available and use it correctly. Report all injuries and accidents to the office and discipline any employee who willfully disregards their safety rules. Employee training, and we do a lot of it. When a supervisor provides instructions on how to perform a task, the relevant safety aspects of the job should be discussed. That's what you do with a JHA. New employee safety orientation should include the following: completing the new employee safety orientation, provide a copy of the safety manual, and explaining the contents, and then a description of the work assignment. Continuing on, we'll talk briefly about the disciplinary policy. You must enforce your policies. If you don't, then it doesn't make any difference. But we know that we do enforce and have disciplinary actions, which include suspension and up to discharge. The following disciplinary actions are not intended to be all-inclusive, and the company reserves the right to discipline employees for engaging in misconduct. Disregarding rules, repeated violations, regardless of intentions, may be grounds for discharge with only one infraction. But the following is the progressive discipline procedure we use. For your first offense, it would be verbal and a written warning. For your second offense, it would be a written warning. The third offense, 2-day suspension without pay. And the fourth offense, well, needless to say, you didn't really want to work here anyway. You would be discharged. It is not necessary that violations be of the same rule either. Violations of 3 different rules may result in a discharge. Just as there's 3 violations of the same rule may result in a discharge, violations of rules that endanger life, fall protection, the way you operate equipment, where serious injury could result, could also lead to an immediate discharge. Any kind of drug or alcohol abuse, fighting or failure to follow directions, being threatening on the job, or banishing a weapon. These are also examples that can result in immediate discharge. Let's talk about site safety. Before the work begins at each job, the superintendent will complete a JHA, and that will be kept in the iPad. And the thing that's important is we can't start a job until we've done a JHA in the morning. So this keeps the crew fully informed of what the plans are, and any change in the work activity would require a new JHA. We really stress about first aid in medical facilities. The emergency phone numbers and addresses will be maintained on the job site bulletin board. Find your bulletin board when you get to your job site. Ask your supervisor where it is located. Also, we have physician-approved first aid kits. There's one in every supervisor's vehicle, every trailer, and sometimes posted in a Connex box on the job site. There inspected weekly by the supervisor and items are replaced as needed. A first aid kit is maintained in each company vehicle as I described earlier, and all our personnel will be trained at some point in basic first aid, CPR, and maybe AED use. Let's talk about personal protective equipment. You should always come to work dressed suitable for the weather. If it's cold, you may have to wear layers. If it's hot, you may want to wear the minimum. But bring extra clothing when changing weather conditions exist. Your PPE should be worn at all times. Long trousers and a shirt with a minimum of 4-inch sleeves are required. No muscle man shirts. Your hard hats are to be worn in the proper manner at all time. Safety toe boots are required. We do not supply those, however, we will provide you with metatarsal shields if requested or if the activity demands it. Remember, sneakers, tennis shoes, or cowboy boots are not permitted unless they're designed specifically for construction. Gloves are required when handling any sharp, jagged materials, hazardous chemicals, repetitive motion with wooden hand tools, shovels, rakes. How about handling rebar and deck pans and anything with a potentially sharp edge? You must be careful. Double eye protection shall be worn when there are hazards from chemicals, grinders, chippers, sandblasters, pressure washers, and jackhammers. Let's talk about general safety rules for housekeeping. When you arrive at work, drug and alcohol free, dress properly for the day's work with a good attitude. Report all incidents, we've already mentioned that, and everyone is required to promptly report any unsafe conditions. No running or jumping are allowed. Always look where you're going at times. Walking paths should be prepared for safe access to all areas. Dig out steps on hillsides and put handrails and steps in. Adequate driving routes and parking spaces must be available. All work areas should be clean and free of debris on a daily basis. Please take the initiative. Get the trash and the garbage and dispose of it properly. And each of the subcontractors are responsible for cleaning their own trash, but sometimes they have to be reminded. Your tool trailer floors should be swept daily and kept clean, free of oil and grease, and persons whose abilities or alertness is impaired by fatigue, illness, or injury. So if you see something, say something. Remember, a clean job site is a safe job site, and we must be careful. Adequate space will be provided for storage of materials and tools. Garbage cans or drums are placed for easy use of litter. Do not fill up a garbage bag and just leave it on the job site over a weekend. The local animals, pets, and nature will tear the bags open, stroll the garbage all over. Also, you need a scrap pile for your metal and concrete stuff. Nails must be removed from every piece of wood before it hits the ground. That's an OSHA violation. If you leave one nail in, that potentially could cost $16,000 approximately. We don't use water kegs or drinking cups. We have bottled water on the job site. We also have toilet facilities called porta potties or porta johns. They're available on the job site. If it is not clean, you must let your supervisor know as soon as possible. Let's talk about fall protection. Workers on working surfaces with unprotected sides or edges 6 feet or higher above a lower level must be protected from falling by the use of guardrails, nets, or some kind of fall arrest system. A fall arrest system is a body harness and a connector and an anchor point capable of supporting 5,000 pounds. So you have to ask yourself, if I'm connected to that anchor, would it hold my car? Because the average car weighs between 3,000 and 5,000 pounds. So if the anchor point won't hold that, it's not suitable to be used as part of your fall arrest system. Remember, we require 100% tie off, and your lanyard, it must be short enough to stop your fall before a hazard can be accounted for. At McInnis, we mostly use double yo-yos, leading edge, because of the type work that we do. Now, if we had to build in a temporary guardrail, it has to be strong enough to support the impact of 200 pounds. That's outer force. So if you take your hand on the top rail, you shouldn't be able to move it more than plus or minus 3 inches. Then your mid rail, which should be half the distance of the 42 plus or minus 3 inches, 45 inches, that would be your mid rail. And then a toe board would be required if people work or walk below. Workers near leading edges, that's the face of formwork, a deck, a floor, leading edge, overhang extensions, web walls, concrete pouring, at least 6 feet or higher must be protected from falls by guardrails, nets, or fall arrest systems. Or you need to maintain a distance greater than 6 feet from a leading edge. Safety harnesses shall bear the load capacity tag. You must have the tag, and it has to be inspected regularly. It also has to be recorded semi-annually, but you need to inspect your harness daily prior to use. You cannot tie any knots or kinks in your lanyard or harness. You may not be having the right size, so therefore we may need to swap that out. Also, be careful of the edge of excavations deeper than 6 feet. That is the same as a leading edge, and you cannot be within 6 foot of that leading edge. When working above dangerous equipment, you must have guardrails, machine guards, or personal fall arrest systems. And then all floor or deck openings shall be guarded by either a secured cover capable of supporting 2 times the intended load, which is going to be up to a 250-pound man or 500 pounds, and it should be labeled. It should say cover or hole in bright letters on it. Typically plywood is used a lot for that. And that's any hole greater than 2 inches on a job site. Here are some things to remember. A, B, C, just like counting your alphabet. A, B, C. A, B, C is a fall protection. A is anchorage, B is body wear, and C is the connecting device. We only use full body harnesses at McInnis, although we do use a variety of connecting devices. This is a cool picture. Can you see what's going on here? In this picture, this is an area where we've tried to put up a barrier to keep people from going beyond that point without proper fall protection, but there's an error here. Look to the left. Look at that leading edge. Look at all the trip hazards there. There also should be a handrail that goes across there. This is another great example of using proper fall protection. The men are in what's called an aerial man lift. And in the man lift, you can see they have their harnesses on and they're tied off to the proper anchor points. But looking above them, working above them on that cross frame, we have a guy that's tied off up the top wearing his proper PPE for fall protection or his personal fall arrest system, and he's tied off correctly, and probably not the best way but a possible way to work from heights. Let's take a look at ladders. We have a whole training session on ladders, but here's a couple of things that I want to throw out. Just remember the top 3 rungs on a ladder. The rungs are what you grab in the center. The rails are on the outside, but the rungs are 3 feet apart. So the ladder must extend at least 3 rungs above your landing surface. And it should be a level surface. It should be tied off, and the angle of your ladder matters. Every 4 feet up, you need to be 1 foot out. So if you're 8 feet up, your ladder should be leaning at 2 feet out. Or if you are 12 feet up, it should be 3 feet out. So keep that in mind, the 1 to 4 ladder height. Make sure that they're tied off, and make sure if you're working in close proximity to anything electrical that you're using a non-conductive ladder such as a fiberglass ladder. If you have a ladder that is damaged, like in this photo here to the right, you can see clearly the top rail is missing. This should have been discarded and replaced immediately. It should be tagged out and destroyed. Remember, never climb a ladder with an object in your hand. You need 3 points of contact when going up or coming down. You should always have a rope at the top of your landing where you can raise or lower materials or equipment for what you're doing. And remember, only one person is allowed on a ladder at a time. So you can see that it doesn't extend high enough. You can see it's damaged. And then look at the lanyard, the yellow lanyard on the back of this employee's harness. He's got his harness on. There's his, and then his connector is that lanyard, and it's not connected to anything. So he would be in violation and was written up on the job for not properly using his PPE. This is an example of an extension ladder being used properly. It's tied off at the top. You can see there's more than 3 rungs above the landing. And it's rated, on the side there's labels. The labels tell you what it's rated for. Let's take a look at trenching and excavation. So every trenching and excavation operation has to be completed by a competent person. Most of the time your foremen and superintendents are going to be your competent persons. We will take care of call before you dig to make sure there's no underground utilities. Remember, trenches over 5 feet deep will be sloped, benched, or shored unless a trench box or a shield is used. And again, we don't do many trenches. We do mostly excavations. Who knows the difference in a trench and an excavation? It has to do with the width at the bottom of the excavation. If it's narrow and tall, it's a trench. If it's wider at the bottom than its height, then it would be an excavation. So that's a whole nother class on trenching and excavation where you'll learn about different types of soils. In Alabama, we primarily have either rock or type C soil, which would require some kind of protection for the employee. And remember, all trenches greater than 4 feet must have an escape route, such as a ladder or an earthen ramp, and that has to be every 25 feet for each worker. If you're working inside a box at all times, you must keep the ladder in, and it must extend 36 inches above the top. That's that 3 feet. Workers must remain inside the trench box or the shield at all times, and excavation must be inspected by a competent person every single day. Every day. And there was an old thought that any trench deeper than 4 feet is a confined space. However, that is not true. It could be a confined space, but 2015 OSHA does not define an excavation as a confined space. However, you have atmospheric conditions that you must consider. All right, so if an excavation is left open between shifts, you must provide a barricade. Every excavation deeper than 20 feet, which we don't do a lot of those, but we do some, it has to have a professional engineer stamp, which showed the design for the sloping, shoring, or the benching system. Trench boxes must be completely assembled. This is important. It must extend 18 inches above the ground level at the top. Materials that's been excavated out can't be stored within 2 feet of the edge of the trench or excavation. You need to keep machinery back away from the edge of the excavation. Be cautious if water is coming into the excavation. It has to be pumped out and possibly some gravel put down inside. Also, when workers are exposed to traffic, They have to be equipped with, again, the orange work vest, and approved barriers will be placed between them and the traffic. Reflecting vests will be worn in low light and especially at nighttime conditions. Take a look at this excavation. There's a couple of things going on here. They did a good job of putting up a rail. They did not need the tow board because there's no one below them. However, we've got a visitor on the job site closer than 6 feet to a leading edge, and he could possibly fall in onto some rebar or injure himself. Also, the spoil pile is pulled back greater than 2 feet from the edge, but if you'll look at the walkboards, there's an exploited view of it at the bottom, and 100% of the area must be covered for your walkboard. Also look for tripping hazards, leftover debris and material that could aid in you falling directly into the excavation. Here's another situation where there was an attempt to put up a barrier, but it was not satisfactory. Remember, the barrier needs to be marked every 6 inches. It needs to be at 42 to 45 inches high. Some cones could have helped in this situation. If you're going to put up more of a temporary barrier, then you would put in wooden guardrail around this area. That is a long distance to fall, probably 10 to 12 feet. I do not know how deep the water is there. Also, if you'll notice in the center of the wall, you'll see a utility pipe coming in where stormwater runoff comes in there. So remember, if you get closer than 6 feet to this edge, you either have to have a guardrail up or you have to have a barrier rail in place that's capable of supporting 100 or 200 pounds or some type of fall protection. Here's another angle of the same excavation, and you can look and see in the bottom those H-pilings sticking up. Could you imagine falling on those, how detrimental that would be? So this is a very unstable situation, and it's not quite or adequately protected. This is another type of situation. If you can see, we have sheet pile on the left side driven, and then we have the trench box installed around the rest. What do you see wrong in this picture? Well, of course, on the top side of the trench box, you can see an employee with his foot up there. There's a plastic barrier around there, but that's not going to protect anybody from falling in. Also, you can see we do have a ladder in the back corner. It's tied off. Remember, they need to be every 25 feet. So in this case, you would only need a single ladder. What we're doing in here, we just drove some pile. We're cutting them off. We're going to be splicing, so we're splicing and welding down in the bottom. Look at his cables. Those should have been elevated and clamped off to some of the other piles. Another problem you could have is always check the atmosphere in an excavation. All right, let's talk about fire protection and prevention. We always use ABC. Each letter stands for the type of fire extinguisher it is. And ABC is kind of a catch-all. So this cart is a burn cart. And on the right, the black bottle is acetylene. The green bottle is oxygen. And they have the proper caps on. And this cart is proper because if you look between them, it has a metal bar that comes up. Not only is it for lifting, but it's a burn plate. And OSHA requires a 30-minute burn plate between two gases like this. If it doesn't have the burn plate, it is not acceptable. As we continue to look at about fire extinguishers, just remember common sense. Don't smoke within 50 feet. Keep work areas clean. Don't stand too close to a fire or flame. Watch out if you're cutting steel in a horizontal position. Where's your flame going? Are you going to start a fire? A grass fire happens a lot on our jobs. Promptly clean up any spills, and be sure that on your system with your torch that you have blowback arresters at the torch, which usually comes in the torch, and back up at the regulators themselves. So be sure on your job sites not just to burn trash piles unless you have a permit. If required, And then a lot of times there's no burning allowed on a job site. It depends on the time of the year and the county that you're in. Know where your fire extinguisher is and the type of fire extinguisher you're using. You should never have to walk a distance greater than 75 feet to pick it up. Okay, so let me teach you real quick about fire extinguishers. You can look at this one. What do you see wrong already? Well, the pin is pulled. And also look at the gauge. It should be vertical in the green area, and it's in the red. That means it's an empty cylinder, so it's no good. But if you were to use it, you would use the PASS acronym, P-A-S-S. P is pull the pin. A, aim at the base of the fire. Squeeze the handle and begin sweeping at the base of the fire back and forth. The purpose of a fire extinguisher is to get you safely away from the hazard. Which of these gas cans are acceptable on a construction site? Correct. The one to the right is the metal one with a positive locking system. The two plastic ones should never be on our job site. They're not OSHA qualified. Okay, let's continue through our safety handbook. We'll look at chemical hazards. And of course, prior to beginning any work in an area containing hazardous materials or hazardous communication, training will be provided. That'll be provided at a later date, but I'm going to walk through it here, give you almost everything that's in the training. So every project has a company chemical hazard communication program. Ours is very simple. It's electronic. It's on every iPad, iPhone. The foreman, the superintendent have direct access to it. Through this new QR code, you will have direct access to it. I'm going to walk you through it and show you what it's all about. So they used to be called MSDS, which was Material Safety Data Sheets. Now it's just SDS, Safety Data Sheets. And there's 16 items in each series of sheets in the SDS manual. I'm going to show you a demonstration. So keep in mind the size of the SDS manual is about 675 pages. So having it electronic is a lot easier than having a bunch of books out on the job site. So we're going to follow this QR code. You can take a picture of it with your camera if you want, and you'll know how to get there. So I'm just going to click on it. All right, so now we're in our special app. Here you can do your chat bot, ask it any questions related to our safety manual or anything related to the ALDOT regulations. There's your quick link to the website. If you want to get an application filled out for someone, there's the Bamboo HR. The HCSS login is for foremen and superintendents. The Right Now Media is a weekly leadership moment that I send out to the foreman, and then they can share the link with you. The SDS manual would be the next one, and then the last one's the new employee safety orientation, which is what we're going through now. So let me show you the SDS manual and binder. So it opens up, and we've got a few things in there. We may isolate it later, but this is what you want, the superintendent's SDS binder. So I've clicked on it. You can download it, you can share it, you can do whatever you want with it. But let's go back to the first page. Right here, we'll just push on this. We can go in here and type page 1, hit enter, and boom, it takes us right to the front cover. And we can go through here. This is the table of contents. You can come in here and select anything. See how it highlights? You can select anything in here and it'll take you to the SDS sheet. Each SDS sheet for each of these items has a total of 16 different items. This is a real common thing, WD-40. I'm going to click on it. It takes us right to that section in the SDS manual where the WD-40 is. Now, it tells you all about it. Identification, hazardous identification. I always say you need to pay attention to number 4, which is what are your first aid measures. If someone gets exposed to it, they need fresh air at once and get them prompt medical condition. If they ingest it, how in the world you would do that, I don't know. But never induce vomiting, and don't give fluids. If it gets on your skin, it can contaminate your clothing, but wash it off with soap and water. And then eye contact is a little more serious. You want to remove any contact lenses before rinsing, and then rinse your eyes for 15 to 20 minutes. All right, so that's an important one, first aid. The other one is number 7, is how do you handle it? What do you do to handle this particular chemical? Keep it away from heat, sparks, and open flames. Avoid inhalation, vapors. Storage precautions. Must not be exposed to direct sunlight. And number 8 is really important because that tells you what PPE you should wear. Gloves and goggles or glasses. Tells you specifically about your hand protection, your eye protection, and again, do not smoke in that area. One last one, remember number 4, 7, and 8, but remember this symbol. This is from the global harmonizing system where these labels, there's 9 of these labels and 12 in some cases, but this would tell you that this is a very flammable gas. And so that would be the main precaution when you're transporting it. Okay, and then you could continue to go through here. If you want to go back and look for another chemical, just simply come back down here, type in 1, hit enter, and it takes you back to the beginning. And then you can open up again the table of contents. You can also see that we're constantly adding more products to this list. So again, 675 pages. Having electronic access is just fantastic. All right, let's continue our process here. All right, so we're going to take a look at flagging. Flagging will be a job everyone does in the field. Flagging is when we're using signs or barricades to divert traffic, to slow traffic, to stop traffic. And the flags have to be 18 by 18. All of ours are. They're super retroreflective, but you need to wear as much retroreflectivity as possible. These vests, those are only good for daytime. They have to have sleeves on them with an extra band in order for it to be a class 3. These are only class 2. These would not be acceptable at night, and we only buy class 3 vests anyway. These are called stop and slow paddles. It's stop on one side, slow on the other, and you'll have a communication with the other flagger at the other end of the project, either by radio, sight, or walkie-talkie. The height of these staffs have to be a minimum of 5 feet, but we prefer to fly them around 6. All right, let's go back and talk a little bit more about hazardous communication. That's the use signs to warn of hazards we're doing. For instance, diesel fuel tanks must be labeled from all sides with a sign. Now, there's different types over here of signs with information. If it's red, it's a danger sign. Pay special attention. If it's orange, it's a warning sign. Pay special attention. And if it's yellow, it's caution, so beware. All of these indicate that's communication. And then the last one, the blue one, is just like it's information. Like this blue sign here, notice all PP required beyond this point. We also have some danger signs, fall protection required beyond this point, English and in Spanish. Okay, so here's the pictographs I was talking about from the global harmonizing system. This is only showing 9 of the symbols. This is the one you need to watch out for. This means it's carcinogenic. It could cause cancer. So look for the pictographs for each one of these. All right, let's talk a little bit about the use of cranes. We have 11 cranes in our fleet. sometimes 12 or 13. We're always rotating those in and out. All crane operators are required to be trained. They're required to be certified, and they're required to be qualified. The company does the qualification. As an employee, you need to be aware it's a potential job for you down the road. Also, from a hazardous standpoint, because they rotate, you want to make sure that you've got some kind of 360-degree barrier so that you don't accidentally walk into the counterweight or any other part of the crane. This is a monster crane here. I think this is 500 ton, and it's mobile, and it's got giant outriggers that come out, and you can see that telescoping boom, and I think it goes up to about 175 feet. It's quite the monster. And down in the lower picture, this is a great shot of where we were setting a series of girders. They were so heavy it took 2 cranes to pick this up and set these up on the caps, and then bolt them up to the cross frames, and then temporary brace them. So again, only trained and approved operators can operate the cranes, but you can learn under the direct supervision of an operator. So you have what's called a boom, hoisting equipment, hooks, shackles, cables. They're inspected daily. There's a daily inspection on all cranes, all man lifts, and all forklifts, and it has to be filled out in the HCSS app. There's some other warnings you can read about, but the main thing down here, warning, do not operate the equipment near overhead high voltage lines. Check for proper safe distance, which is a minimum of 10 feet, but the higher the voltage, the greater the distance, up to 40 feet. Let's take a look at the crane signals. On the side of every crane, you'll see this sticker, and you need to learn these. You'll actually go through a little test on taking these hand signals and learning how they work. There's different hand signals for mobile cranes versus fixed crane, lattice boom versus rough terrain, but these are still the same. This is the one you need to understand the most, the emergency stop. Now, every crane that's being operated has a designated flagman who's flagging the crane. He's the only one that tells the crane operator what to do. But everyone on the job site needs to know the emergency stop signal, because who has the authority to stop the project because of safety issues? Right, everyone does. So you need to learn this one above all else. On rigging and hoisting, rigging is a whole craft in itself. That's where you get into knowing how to tie knots, hook up chokers, slings, the proper way to use shackles. We have a whole class on rigging. And then know what to look for when you're inspecting your chokers and slings. Look for the bird caging, where the strands are starting to separate, or broken strands, maybe even a kink or a cracked hook in the eyes. And then those are inspected prior to use every day. And then the storage of that is so critical. Don't just throw it down in the sand or the mud or the dirt. You want to hang it up on a hook of some sort and keep it out of the wet areas in the mud. And remember, don't signal the crane operator until everyone is clear. You never bring a load in over the top of someone's head, and don't get under the load. And remember this, when it's necessary to flag the operator, always designate only one person to do all the signaling. You have to inspect the project for overhead lines. We've talked about that. And never get underneath a suspended load or permit others. Watch out, you are your brother's keeper. And there's some more important policy regulations there to look at. In this group here, I would say make sure you've selected the right equipment for the job. The most important thing on rigging is you have to know the weight of all the loads. That's the equipment capacities, where is the center of gravity, and specifically what is the weight of the item that you're going to be picking up. Make sure your outrigger pads are being used, and you'll learn more about that as we go through your on-the-job training. Let's talk about pile driving operations. We're a pile driving company. We do foundation work. We drive pipe pile. We drive concrete square pile. We drive H-pile, all different weights and sizes. And you're going to learn a lot about it. But prior to starting a pile driving operation, after you've done the JHA, you'll go out and inspect all loose bolts and nuts and make sure everything is tight. And then the metal lifeline grab that goes along the fixed leads on the side where the ladder is for you to tie off with a unique device for if you have to climb up the side of the leads to either change out the helmet or do something up top side to the hammer. You'll learn more about that in the field. Now, because you're pile driving, that's a very loud sound, and you have to wear what? Ear protection, correct? Anything over greater than 85 decibels requires ear protection, and we provide you that ear protection on the job. That is a common write-up to come out on a job pile driving and find employees not wearing proper ear protection. This is a big job. This was a big crane with a big hammer, and you can see the concrete square pile. Look at the man lift. This guy here, I don't know if you see him. Let me zoom in for you. He's climbed out of the man basket onto the ladder, and he's hooked into the cable, and he worked his way up so he can make an adjustment on the hammer. It's just what happens from time to time. Here's another unique type hammer. This is called a Birmingham hammer. It comes from the manufacturer Birmingham actually. And so it's made for low overhead. There's actually a bridge in place. We're underneath the bridge driving short length piles and making splices as it goes. And it'll initially start off with vibrating them down, and then you would move to the hammer part. So you can see these piles have been cut off, and it's hard to see, but you have to square these up. They have to be level in both directions. This is one of the engineers who's laid out in the dirt the exact location and the direction of the H-pile. What is missing here, though? No barrier across here. There should be a barrier set up across here. You can see the trench box is in place. And now the one problem I see here too, you can't have more than 2 feet below an existing trench box for it to be registered as safe. Also, because we've got so much combustion engines in this area, we need to come in and we need to check the air and the atmosphere a couple of times a day and record it. Okay, let's talk about overhead wires. We talked a little bit about that. Remember, you never want to be closer than 10 feet. And sometimes you have to put up a limited access or a swing zone where the operator can't see the wire, so you're going to put on the ground something to remind him not to raise a load or materials any higher than is necessary beyond that point. Confined spaces, there's 3 to 4 things about a confined space. Number one, is it large enough for a person to enter? But it's not designed for continuous employee occupancy. Okay, it also has a very limited means of entry and exit. In most cases, for our excavations on our coffer dams or coffer sales, we're going to have large ladders going in and out. And then it's also subject to air contamination from hazardous substances. So you constantly have to check the inside of a confined space with the proper meter, just making sure that your oxygen level is greater than 19.5% and that there's no additional noxious gases in that area. Anyone going into the confined space has to be trained, and because you have to have the knowledge and skills necessary to perform the safe duties inside. Typically, as a rule of thumb at this company, we don't enter into any of the column forms, which would be considered a confined space. We try to do everything from the outside, therefore eliminating the hazard. This is an example of a column form. Somebody give me the peace sign off the bridge. You can see the chute from the concrete truck, and at the top, it's hard to see, but this is a trimmy pipe with a a funnel on it, and the concrete dumps in the trimming pipe and goes all the way to the bottom, and they continuously fill the column form. But again, we try not to go inside the forms. Lockout safety, we always use lockout. What it's doing is eliminating the energy and whatever it is. It could be a tool, a machine. It could be anything that could cause harm, and it could be having mechanical problems. It's not just flicking off a switch, but it's going out and locking it out with a lock and a label. And if you lock it, you're the only one that can take the lock off. So never rely on others to lock out a device for your personal safety. This is an example of a do not operate. Found a bad regulator, so there's a problem with it. More than likely the gauges are not correct. It's got my name on there when I did it, so only I can take that off. All right, let's talk about electrical safety. So again, we talked about being in proximity of a crane to any kind of overhead electrical lines. There could be underground utility lines. Did you know that with the high humidity in Alabama and an electrical storm, that the arc can jump from the power line all the way to the leads on the crane, which could electrocute anybody within 50 feet of the radius of that crane. So it's very important. Also, other types of electrical issues could be not having the proper ground pin on your tool or on your extension cords. The one thing I want to mention here, most importantly, is that if an extension cord or drop cord pin is bent or missing, the cord must be removed from service, tagged, replaced, and repaired only by a qualified person. You should inspect all extension cords for all 3 pins prior to use. Here's a couple of examples. Does anyone know what this is called? This is a vibrator. This plugs into an electrical extension cord. What's missing? That's right, the pin is missing. And so this had to be tagged out for a new cord to be put on. It takes about 10 minutes. And there's the brand new cord. Take the old one off, unscrew it, put the new one on, screw it, and you're good to go. And by the way, you'll be using the vibrators quite often on the job site. Let's talk about torches and cutting. That's a situation where you're going to have double eye protection. You need the specific glasses that are designed for cutting with oxyacetylene, and then you need a face shield to protect your shield from any spatter from the weldment or the steel that you're cutting to keep it from burning your face. Sometimes we have hot permits. If we work at a power company, there's a hot permit required before you can even strike an arc. Always check the backside of your work to make sure that there's nothing that can catch on fire. Be mindful of where the sparks and the slag is going. The welding leads and burning hoses should not be run across a driveway, doorways, and must be protected by suspending is the best way. Welding leads should not lay across a wire handrail. It could electrocute it if there was a bare spot in the welding lead. Always have fire protection available at the work site. You cannot do hot work, welding or cutting, without a fire extinguisher within 75 feet of the work. Typically, it should be on site in direct access to where the work is going on. Always be mindful of what you're cutting in case there's some gas or fuel or some kind of other explosive type material. You need to secure all your cylinders upright with the cap when they're not in use, like I showed you in that previous picture. I'll show you some more stuff here. And just remember, it's compressed gas cylinders, and that has to be stored in the vertical position at all time. You cannot lay those down at all. And you're going to use these quite often out on the job site. If you're storing oxygen and acetylene on the job site and they're not in the specialty cart with the 30-minute burn plate, they have to be stored at least 20 feet away or with a non-combustible barrier at least 5 feet high to resist what they call the resistance rating at least 1/2 hour. Always check your hoses, torches, and regulators for leaks. Also, you're supposed to use flashback prevention valves. They're in the torches we buy, but they're not at the, sometimes you have to add them to the gauges. Check with your supervisor to be sure. What it is, it's a blowback preventer. It keeps you from blowing up your regulators or catching something on fire. Be careful all the time with a spark igniter. When you're lighting the torches, do not use cigarettes, matches. You can't do that. Use the specific striker that's designed for that job. When using oxygen and acetylene, always point the valve away from your face when you're cracking the valve. Open the valve slowly to avoid damage, and don't carry any matches or lighters on your person when you're using cutting and welding equipment. That can be a bad situation. It has happened before, but not on our job sites. Keep all grease and oil away from the cylinder valves and the hoses. It's incompatible. And protective caps should be in place when the regulators are not connected to the cylinders. Remember that. So what do you see wrong in this picture? Well, we have a regulator. The bottle is black, therefore it's acetylene, it's a gas. And on one gauge on the left, it's got a cover. The one on the right does not, so it cannot be an accurate gauge. Also, it's red in color, and it says written on there, this is acetylene. So this had to be tagged out and replaced. Let's talk about arc welding. We do a lot of arc welding on our jobs. It has to be adequately grounded. You must have the correct rods. You cannot leave those in the rod holders. They must be put back in the boxes and stored in a heated oven of some sort. Welders must wear approved welding helmets. We will provide you those. If you want your own, it has to be approved by the safety manager. And welding machines have to be turned off at the end of each shift. Welding operations shall not be performed from metal ladders like we just discussed earlier. The electrode holder and the connecting cables fully insulated. Sometimes even a little extra electrical tape comes in handy. The welder shall avoid standing on damp or wet surfaces. He will get a shock. And when electrode holders are left unattended, electrodes should be removed. That's your welding rods. Here's an example of welding some of our bearing plates next to these big giant steel girders where these cross frames have been added. Again, here's that example of what's wrong here? He's got the wrong kind of ladder. He should have a fiberglass ladder or a different setup. He's welding, but it looks to me like he's slugging the weld, which is totally illegal. So you can't do what I see this guy doing. Also, he's not wearing any kind of a hard hat on the job site. That's his rod holder, and it's not a good one because you sweat. When you do, the cellulose in the rod becomes wet, and it will not provide good insulation. So here's another picture of a welder getting ready to weld the bearings in place. In this picture, he's got the proper rod holder, and he's ready to get in here and weld this bearing plate to the masonry plate. Okay, let's talk about heavy machinery. Only trained and qualified operators are allowed to run equipment, and always use seat belts where provided. You must beep the horn prior to moving any piece of heavy machinery. Use the 3-point contact, just like in ladders. You don't jump off. You use 3 points of contact. Equipment operators who operate equipment with rollover protection systems, you have to wear your seat belt at all times. Again, beep your horn before moving. There's also should be a backup alarm. If there's not, it needs to be tagged out and repaired prior to any more use. It has to be thoroughly checked every day for mechanical failure, and the operators have to inspect the equipment every day and report any problems they find to the supervisor and through HCSS, our safety inspection software. Don't operate defective equipment. Equipment shall be greased. Necessary maintenance, I would say, at the end of the day. That way, at the first part of the day when you come in, you're good to go. Top off the machine in the afternoon. There's a lot of things to consider. Operators shall not start or operate equipment while personnel are oiling or adjusting. And then if it's being idled or parked, you have to lower whatever hydraulic you have, a bucket, a blade, or forks that have to be lowered to the ground, according to OSHA. Use wheel chocks to create a braking system. And then most importantly, personnel shall not be permitted to approach the cab of any piece of equipment until the operator has made eye contact with that operator, with the individual. Let's talk about this. This guy was wearing a wedding ring on the job site, and it got hung on a piece of equipment, and it ripped all the skin off of his finger. Totally avoidable. We do not allow you to wear any metal type or even fiberglass type wedding rings on the job site. He wound up losing his entire finger. What an awful situation. Totally avoidable. This is a amputation, and it would require notifying OSHA within 8 hours of the injury. It's also called degloving. So a lot of people who love marriage and like to wear a band, they went to the rubber bands, and what happened was they came into contact with an electrical service, and it actually melted his rubber band and burned his finger, and that's how much dead skin they had to remove from that. So be careful. Just don't wear any rings or jewelry on the job site. All right, let's take a look at concrete and masonry. There's always some hazards. There's a lot of calculations that go into how much concrete we need and how much rebar. It's all right on the plans. And like Travis said in an earlier video, you may want to just check the plans and read about it. But exposed rebar, like where it's sticking up directly, it needs to have these orange or yellow caps that are put on top to protect the employee. Also, if you take 2x4s, you can create a trough that can sit down over the top of the rebars. One last thing, although there's a lot of things to consider here. Form removal creates exposure to falling forms. So splinters, nails, be sure you're using PPE, and stack the forms nice and neatly in a designated location. Also, remember, no nails before the wood hits the ground. Here's a good example of a pumper truck. Actually, two of them. This was our single longest pour in the history of McInnis, 465 linear feet in a single day. This is a connection at the top of the buckets that we use for swinging concrete. This is called a shackle. It's going through the eye, and then you see the cable that comes around it. It's starting to birdcage and become deformed. At some point, you'll need to replace that cable. Let's talk about motor vehicles. When you become a foreman or a superintendent, you'll be assigned a vehicle for your use. Again, anytime you ride in one of the company cars, you must have your seatbelt on. Make sure everyone's obeying the speed limit. And no riding in the back of pickup trucks. This can happen very easily. A lady ran a stoplight and causing one of our vehicles to T-bone her. And this was a 2-week-old brand new F-250 Super Duty Ford pickup. Let me scroll up real quick. I want to talk about this. On every job site, we're required to have a toilet on the job site. They're called porta-johns, porta-potties. Some people call them something else. The thing is that you need to leave it clean. Keep up the paper. Make sure it stays dry. Be prompt as others may need the facility. Don't take your break in there for 20 minutes. I don't see how you could stand to do it anyway. But report when you find low toilet paper, or if service is needed, if it's too full and messy. We even found one the other day where the roof, somebody had dropped something on the roof and it was compromised. And so if it rained, it's getting inside. Tool inspection is very important. We have a lot of tools. We have power tools. We have hand tools. When it becomes worn or damaged, it has to be taken out of service and tagged for repair or discarded. Personal tools, they're subject to inspection at any time, but we supply a lot of your tools. Use tools only for their designated purpose, and only qualified and authorized personnel should operate certain tools and all equipment like power actuated tools, which we don't use much of. All power tools and extension cords must be grounded. We already mentioned that. Unless the tool itself is double insulated, you have to make sure you've got the 3-prong. Remember, all frayed drop cords should either be discarded or repaired, but you are not allowed to do that. That requires a qualified person to make those repairs. You can cut them off and add a new end to it, but you can't repair the cord. They're not made for hoisting stuff. We always have ground fault indicators on the job site. Be sure and switch off your plugging when you're plugging in a tool. If the trigger is stuck on and you plug it in, it could be very dangerous. Keep moving parts of power tools pointed away from your body, and do not operate electrical tools while standing on damp or wet surfaces. There's more to read there about the tools that are available. The guarding on grinders, do not remove guards. Guards have to be in place. If you remove a guard, you've broken a rule, and you could be written up for that. It also is very, very, very dangerous. Be sure and unplug all your tools when you're through using them for the day. And also some other tools like drift pins, wedges, hammers, chisels. The heads will mushroom over time. When they do, don't go grind it down. Just go replace it. And don't leave your tools laying around where someone can trip or stumble over those things. All pneumatic hoses connections has to be fastened securely with a positive means to prevent the tool from becoming disconnected. Safety clips and retainers must be installed on pneumatic tools, and then screw or radiator hose clamps are not to be used on pneumatic hose connections. A couple more quick things about hand and power tools. Hand tools and power operated tools shall be used for the tasks they're designated or designed for. Inspect hand tools for defects. Replace as necessary. Impact tools such as drip pins, wedges, chisels shall be kept free from mushroom. I think we've covered that pretty good. We talked about the guards and defective stuff. So this is a good example. You've got a guy working here. He's installing all the wood forms for the web walls. He's tied off to this anchor point right here, which is a horizontal lifeline or a hog line. And then he's got his hand tools there, and he's got some kind of power tool connected in here. Over here is a guy using a circular saw. You got some other power tools. Looks like he's building the forms and passing them to these guys to install. It's good that you've got the guardrail up because you're closer than 6 feet to a 6-foot drop off to the next lower level. Okay, if we're working over water, which we occasionally do, the U.S. Coast Guard approved life jackets must be worn. You also have to have a life ring with at least 90 feet of line, and they must be placed every 200 feet. And you have to have a small boat with some kind of paddle. And anytime you're lifting over water in a personnel platform, the worker's supposed to wear his life vest, but he is not supposed to be tied off at the anchor point in the platform. The worker is to remain unhooked while over water. Here's an example of a work vest. And here's a job that we were repairing the column with carbon fiber reinforcement. Here's another picture showing the rescue boat, the life rings every 90 feet with 200 foot of cord. Okay, this is where you would acknowledge the receipt of this and you would sign it, print your name and date it. And then that comes back to Angie in the HR department. Let me speed that up for us.
Hello, Hazelden Builders. My name is Travis Weber, and I am a safety manager here at Hazelden Construction. I'd like to take some time today to review the hazards and the protective measures associated with exposures to respirable crystalline silica. Many of our activities on a day-to-day basis generate respirable crystalline silica and may expose employees to this harmful dust. The purpose of this training today is to heighten your awareness and to better protect yourself and your coworkers. Our goal at Hazelden is to always provide a safe and healthy work environment free from recognized hazards. Crystalline silica is a basic component of soil, sand, granite, and many other minerals. Quartz is the most common form of crystalline silica. This can be found in many of the Earth's raw materials and man-made materials such as concrete mixes, masonry blocks, bricks, and many materials used on construction projects. Silica exposure can occur during many different construction activities. Exposure to this harmful dust can occur when respirable-sized dust particles become airborne and are inhaled during concrete mixing, dry cutting, hammer drilling, chipping, abrasive grinding, tuck pointing, and even dry sweeping of concrete floors.
As the worker breathes, silica crystals flow into his mouth and nose and down the air passages deep into the lungs. The tiny crystals enter the small, fragile air sacs, where oxygen is absorbed into the blood. Immune system cells, called macrophages, engulf and try to dissolve the crystals, but they are unable to. Over time, more and more crystals build up inside the macrophage cells. The macrophages carry the silica into the walls of the lung, where they die. Scar tissue forms around the dead cells and spreads as more cells die. This damage can continue even after the exposure to silica stops. Eventually, so much scar tissue forms that the lungs can no longer function.
There are three types of silicosis. The first type is known as chronic silicosis, which is the most common form. This typically occurs after 15 to 20 years of moderate to low exposure to respirable crystalline silica. The symptoms associated with chronic silicosis may or may not be obvious. Therefore, workers would need a chest x-ray to determine if there is lung damage. Accelerated silicosis can occur after 5 to 10 years of high exposure to respirable crystalline silica, and these symptoms include severe shortness of breath, chest pain, and respiratory failure. Acute silicosis occurs only after a few months or as long as a few years following exposures to extremely high concentrations of respirable silica, and these symptoms include severe disabling shortness of breath, weakness, and weight loss, which will often lead to death.
1935, a wave of fear was sweeping the country. Silicosis was taking its toll from the ranks of American workers. Cause of the disease, dust. Results of the disease, disablement, poverty, death. Cure for the disease, none. Throughout America, workers exposed to dust grew fearful of their health, of their very lives. 1936, amid these alarming events, the Secretary of Labor called together a national conference to study this disease. A committee of 60 experts was appointed, and a year later reported to the Secretary of Labor.
The U.S. Department of Labor first highlighted the hazards of respirable crystalline silica in the 1930s after a wave of worker deaths. The department set standards to limit worker exposures in 1971 when OSHA was created. However, more recent studies have shown that the standards were not adequate to protect employees. In 2013, a final rule was proposed by OSHA that made substantial changes to reduce the exposure levels of respirable crystalline silica to workers while improving worker protection. The final rule was issued to curb lung cancer, silicosis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and kidney disease in American workers. This new rule was developed to save lives and prevent future cases of silicosis. final rule for silica was established in the 29 CFR construction standards under the new subsection 1926-1153. This new standard went into effect as of June 2016. Because of the health hazards associated with silica, OSHA has reduced the permissible exposure limit, or PEL, to silica dust to 50 micrograms per cubic meter on an 8-hour TWA, or time-weighted average. The new standard is basically 1/5 of what was previously allowed for construction. In this picture, we can see the size of a piece of beach sand in comparison to the human hair. The beach sand is about 90 micrometers in diameter, and the human hair on average is 70 micrometers. The particles of silica dust that become respirable and trapped in the lungs are those illustrated here that are 10 micrometers in diameter and smaller. The smaller the particles become, the deeper in the lungs that they can be trapped. These little respirable dust particles are about 1/7 the diameter of the human hair. In reality, these are little floating particles in the air that you cannot see and probably do not even know are being inhaled. The new OSHA rule that have provided two options to maintain compliance with the standard to offer the protection needed. Option 1 is simply follow the dust control methods found in Table 1 of the construction standard. When these methods to control the dust are followed correctly, employers are not required to measure worker exposures. The second option is to control the dust with our own protective measures, then measure the amount of silica dust to which workers are exposed. If it is at or above the action level, then we must find better measures to protect workers from crystalline silica dust and continue with further air monitoring. The new standard also requires the employer to establish and implement a written exposure control plan. Hazelden Construction has developed a written exposure control plan that illustrates the required engineering controls, work practices, and appropriate PPE required when working around respirable crystalline silica dust. Let's go ahead and review some of the typical silica dust creating work activities that you may be exposed to, and then look at each of the protective measures that are required by the written exposure control plan. Let's take a moment and look at the requirements for floor sweeping activities. The personal protective equipment for this scope of work will require the standard issued Hazelden PPE. There are no other special PPE requirements for this task. We have identified that the tool being used for this will be a broom, and the dust control methods that are required include the use of sweeping compound or a wet method. Respiratory protection is not required for this task. Dry sweeping on the project is not permitted, and we must utilize the sweeping compounds or wet methods to control the dust. Now let's take a look at chipping concrete with an electric chipping hammer. In the written control plan, the personal protective equipment for this scope of work requires the standard issued Hazelden PPE, but also includes other protective measures. Chipping concrete will require the use of a face shield, hearing protection, and also a long sleeve shirt. The tool being used for this task is an electric chipping hammer, and the dust control method requires the use of the attached dust shroud and also a HEPA dust collection system. This system is designed to collect the respirable dust particles and keep them contained within the dust extractor. This task also has respiratory protection requirements. An N100 respirator with an APF of 10 is required for all indoor work or when outdoor work is conducted for 4 hours or more. When performing dowel or bolt drilling tasks, the written control plan requires the use of the standard issued Hazelden PPE, but also includes the use of other protective measures. Dowel and bolt drilling will also require the use of a face shield and hearing protection. The tool used for this is the electric hammer. The dust control method that is listed requires the use of an attached dust shroud and also HEPA dust collection system. Once again, this system is designed to collect the respirable dust particles and keep them contained within the dust extractor. Now let's take a look at cutting concrete with a handheld saw. In the control plan for this work, the personal protective equipment requires the standard issued Hazelden PPE and includes some other protective measures as well. Handheld saw cutting of concrete will require the use of a face shield, hearing protection, and also long sleeve shirts. The tool being used for this includes the fuel or electric powered demo saw or circular saw equipped with a concrete cutting blade. The dust control method requires the use of an integrated water delivery system. It's important to note that the water delivery system shall be integrated into the tool and must be a continuous feed delivery system. Cutting concrete with a handheld saw also has respiratory protection requirements. An N100 respirator with an APF of 10 is required for all indoor work and when outdoor work is conducted for 4 hours or more. Where vertical grinding is taking place, the written control plan establishes that the personal protective equipment for this scope of work requires the standard issued Hazelden PPE, but also includes some other protective measures. Vertical grinding of concrete will require the use of a face shield, hearing protection, and also long sleeve shirt. The tool being used for this job is a handheld grinder. The dust control methods that are listed require the use of the attached dust shroud and also a HEPA dust collection system. Once again, this system is designed to collect the respirable dust particles and keep them contained within the dust extractor. Vertical concrete grinding does have respiratory protection requirements. When grinding indoors for more than 4 hours, an N100 respirator with an APF of 10 is required. Respiratory protection for this task is not required when working outdoors. Commercially available HEPA dust extraction systems are required for several types of equipment that were discussed. This requirement enables employers to use equipment that is designed to effectively capture the dust generated by the tool being used and does not introduce new hazards such as obstructing or interfering with safety mechanisms. It's important to note that commercially available limitation is meant to eliminate job-built tools made by the employer. Employers can use products that are made by aftermarket manufacturers that are intended to fit the make and model of the tool. These dust collection systems are designed to work effectively with the equipment and not introduce new hazards such as obstructing or interfering with safety mechanisms. A dust extraction system looks a lot like a shop vac, but it has a two-stage system that separates the large dust particles from the fine ones, keeping the filter clear so that most of the respirable dust is trapped. Always make sure that the filter is installed before using the dust extractor and use a bag or liner so you are not exposed to respirable silica when emptying the system. If you see dust escaping from the tool or from the extractor, please stop work and check for obstructions or leaks in the system. Integrated water delivery systems are also required for several types of equipment that we discussed. Integrated water systems must be developed specifically for the type of tool in use, so they will apply water at the appropriate dust emission points based on the tool configuration and will not interfere with other tool components or safety devices. The water must be applied at flow rates sufficient to minimize release of visible dust. Effective control of the dust depends on factors such as dust particle size, dust velocity, spray nozzle size, and location. Water flow rates for controlling silica dust emissions can vary, therefore it's necessary to follow the manufacturer's instructions when determining the required flow rate for dust suppression systems. When using integrated water delivery systems, it's important to note that the slurry will be generated. Any slurry that has been generated shall be cleaned up to limit secondary exposure to silica dust when the slurry dries. When respirators are required by this standard, the respirators used must comply with the written Hazelden Respiratory Protection Program. When following the specified control methods fully and properly, there are still many work activities in addition to engineering controls that will require the use of respiratory protection. When respirators are required, they will either be an N100 model respirator that has an assigned protection factor of 10 or a PA/PR respirator with an assigned protection factor of 25. Sometimes oil may be present in the breathing zone. In this case, a P100 respirator will be required. The location of where the work is being conducted, the amount of time it takes to complete the work, and the potential exposure levels of silica-containing dust will all be determining factors in which respiratory protection is required. Fortunately, the designed respiratory protection that is required for each task is clearly spelled out in the written silica control plan and can be found under the respirator section of Table 1 in the chart. It's important to note that workers must be qualified to wear a respirator. Special training, medical evaluations, and medical clearance are required before any employee can be permitted to wear a respirator. Please contact your safety department for further questions regarding the respiratory protection program and the requirements involved. The safety of Hazelden employees is an important concern of Hazelden Construction. We pledge not to compromise the safety of our employees or subcontractors. Our aim is to prevent all incidents and occupational injuries and illnesses. In return, each employee has the responsibility to recognize, avoid, and report unsafe situations and acts. We expect site superintendents, project managers, supervisors, and employees to ensure safe and helpful working conditions, to instruct employees in safe practices, and to inform workers of any workplace hazards. All employees are expected to work in a manner which safeguards themselves and others, and to participate in the improvement of work conditions and work practices in order to reduce hazardous conditions at the job site. I would like to personally thank you for your time today and your dedication to working safely. And remember, the safest risk is the one you didn't take. Please work safe.
McInnis's number one rule for silica control is it must be wet. You always must have water, whether you're drilling, chipping, grinding, any kind of concrete. It must be wet, so there's no dust. It's called the no dust rule. We also have the table 1 that OSHA came up with and have applied our information towards that. All right, this ends or concludes the first part of the new employee safety orientation. Stand by, we have more videos to watch.